This is the time of the year, though. Fantasy playoffs on the verge, where as long as you're getting through, your bench doesn't necessarily matter nearly as much. You don't need those wide receiver 5s and 6s anymore. You have your starting lineup set from weeks 15, 16, and 17, maybe a couple depth pieces, but ultimately this is the time to load up on stashes and handcuffs, specifically at the running back position. Even though 2024, I've never seen a year quite like this at the health at the running back position. Nobody's been getting hurt. There's been really no value to emerge at running back right now. That doesn't mean that can't change here down the stretch. We just saw CMC go down and now Grendo's a blow-it-all. Well, maybe we have to get ahead on some other guys here in the fantasy playoffs. So when I'm looking at stashes, when I'm looking at handcuffs here, I want to ask first, am I confident in this environment? Is this something where any type of running back can step in and thrive? Am I confident, number two, that the running back will command the touches? Will it be forced into a committee situation? We see that so often. The starter goes down. He was a 70% workload guy, and now that 70% is divided up between 3 mouths, and it stinks. But some guys, as backups, could truly command massive workloads, and so we'll talk about the ones we truly believe in being capable of doing so. And then with the work they get, are they good talents? Are they going to actually produce? That's not always the crucial piece here, but every now and again, you can get these electric backs that come in, even if they're just kind of plotters. If they're getting the volume, that can be crucial as well. And now I do add one. That's usually the checklist I go through all year. But wow, at this time of the year, the fourth wrinkle I like to examine is how's that playoff schedule look? And not everyone's going to be rosy and perfect, but a lot of these guys have great playoff schedules, and I do want to prioritize those guys because ultimately we only have 3 games left after this week, and I want the guys that should the starter go down, like they have a matchup where I'm going to rank them in my top 15, my top 10 potentially even for some of these names. And so those are the guys I'm prioritizing. And you can see the name on the screen. It's been sitting there for a little while. Zach Charbonnet, unsurprisingly, is my number 1 running back stash. And handcuff, he's out there in 60% of leagues. I was shocked by that. I kind of just Googled his name thinking he was going to be about 70% rostered. No, he's out there in a ton of leagues right now. And we've already seen it with him. 2 starts, 15.5 and 24.2 half PPR fantasy points. Ultimately out-touched Kenny McIntosh, 40 touches to Kenny McIntosh's 3. Was the clear-cut every down featured back. Was Zach Charbonnet? He's pretty good. He's no Ken Walker, but definitely one of the more premier talents as a number 2 running back. I think if anything does happen to Ken Walker, and ultimately Charbonnet closed out that game because Walker had a tough hit on his knee. He went down. It wasn't like he was carted off. Didn't look like it was anything totally serious, but it does seem like Charbonnet, he got those last 3 touches, including the goal line one, which he converted on, and it could be something. If Walker ends up missing any time or is hampered and limited, maybe Charbonnet takes over for these remaining 3 weeks. The schedule, not too shabby. Arizona, 15th points. Green Bay, 18th in points. Minnesota, 30th. That's a tough matchup there in week 16. But in your championship, he gets Chicago, a top 10 matchup as well. So should he make any starts in there, other than Minnesota, he'd be a lock for the lineups. And even then, given the volume that he gets in his starts, I think Charbonnet would probably still be a top 20 running back in that matchup. The next number 2 handcuff I have, the number 2 stash, is Braelon Allen, 32% rostered. And there's a couple reasons why he's as high. The environment issues are real. Aaron Rodgers looks like a complete dumpster fire. The line doesn't look nearly as good. So I don't love Braelon Allen's environment like I expected to this year. We still saw Breece Hall put up a 30-point day just 2 weeks ago, and I don't think it's completely something to rule out that Braelon Allen could have some monster days. The youngest player in the NFL right now, an absolute tank, size, speed beast here is Braelon Allen. But the reason I really have him high is this playoff schedule, plus the fact that Breece is already hampered. Looking at Breece, is coming off a season-low 52% of the running back touches last week. Did not look very efficient on any of them. And with the Jets dead and even more dead, it does seem like a very real possibility that Breece Hall just gets shut down. Maybe he even just shuts down himself. I don't know, but it seems like whether this knee ends up just flaring up even more and they have to ultimately shut him down, or they just want to play it safe, there's a very real path for Braelon Allen to get there given the starter status in front of him. Breece Hall also only had 1 of the 6 running back targets last week to show you how his role is diminishing. If I'm moving forward, I am terrified for what this guy could be doing in my fantasy lineups. But what I also love, and I hinted at, was the playoff matchup. So against Miami this week, not going to really start Allen in most situations unless I'm desperate for the bye week. I have some injuries piling up. But if he continues to take over the work for Breece Hall, you got Jacksonville in week 15, second most points. Rams in week 16, ninth most points. Buffalo in week 17, third most points allowed to backs. Legitimately 3 straight top 10 matchups, 2 in the top 3. You could not ask for a better playoff schedule for Mr. Braelon Allen here. So he is my number 3 running back stash. Not far behind him is Tyler Allgeier, 32% rostered. He also has a solid schedule. Tough matchup versus Minnesota this week, but you're not worried about that because you're just stashing in case something happened to Bijan. But then you got the Raiders, the Giants, and the Commanders. None of those matchups are scary. The Giants are bottom 5 in points allowed, highest yards per carry allowed to running backs. And we've already seen Tyler Allgeier go berserk before in the fantasy playoffs. Nonetheless, either as a rookie was the running back 5, averaged 16.3 fantasy points per game from weeks 15, 16, and 17 and 18. Had 13 plus fantasy points in all 4 of those weeks. Ultimately racked up 1,000 yards in that season. So Tyler Allgeier, definitely somebody, 3-down capability. I would be more than happy to have on my bench. Ray Davis, got to mention him as well. Fresh off an 11 carry, 62-yard day. He just continues to flash every time he touches the rock. A beast of a bowling ball type of player. We've already seen James Cook miss one game, and it was clear Ray Davis was the number 2 back behind him. Had 80% of the running back touches in that game. Absolutely thrived, racked up over 150 total yards. Dominated as a receiver as well. Now, with Ray Davis, the schedule isn't quite as juicy as some of these other handcuffs. Gets the Rams this week. That's actually a good spot, but we know James Cook is there. But should James Cook miss time, well, Detroit comes up in week 15, 31st in points allowed. Then New England, not a bad spot at all, 12th in points allowed. Then the Jets, middle of the road, 23rd, but they continue to get worse and worse by the week. So at least in week 16 and 17, Ray Davis could be a real beast should he be making a start. It'd be hard to trust him even as a starter against Detroit, though, in that week 15 matchup. Next up is Blake Corum. I just have like 3 other handcuffs I want to quickly chat through, but this is the time of the year you really need to be diving into these guys and stashing them. Blake Corum coming off a career high, season high, 8 carries, 42 yards, and a 30% snap share. Not sitting here trying to victory lap. Oh my God, 30% snap share. Let's go. But ultimately, this guy looked really good. 8 carries, 42 yards, well over 5 yards a pop there. And again, that snap share continuing to eat into the work there of Kyren Williams, who had a great week, 15 carries, 104 yards, and a touchdown himself. But Corum did look phenomenal, and that workload could catch up to him at any moment, Blake Corum, with Kyren Williams. So they get Buffalo this week, a great spot for running backs. But then in the fantasy playoffs, San Fran, 6th most points allowed to backs. Great matchup there. The Jets, well, we talked about middle of the road. And then Arizona, 15th in points allowed as well. So if Corum does end up making any starts, we know this McVay backfield is an absolute gold mine that he loves to ride. One running back and that he really likes to feast at the red zone, his running backs. That's why Kyrie has just dominated, averaging nearly a touchdown a game since taking over as the starter. Alrighty. And then not too far from these guys is Trey Benson. I do think he's a little bit of a tier below, I would say, those 5 guys. And then Trey Benson, 23% rostered. But we know the injury history with James Conner. He's somehow miraculously this year, no one's getting hurt at running back. I'm not wishing for injury or anything of that nature, but just trying to prepare for it. And we've had James Conner miss 3+ games every year of his career. Maybe not going to happen this year, but if he misses any type of time, look at Trey Benson's schedule. New England in week 15, 12th most points. Carolina, week 16, the most points. And then the Rams there in week 17, the 9th most points allowed to the running back position. So an absolute goldmine schedule there for Trey Benson. Definitely somebody you want to be stashing on your roster. An electric 4.3, similar to Grendo, like a 220-pound guy that runs a 4.3. Somebody I would absolutely love to be rostering, no doubt about it. And then pulling up one other guy here, one handcuff that I have to mention because of the schedule and because we've just seen him in the past be absolutely electric. And that is Tyjae Spears for the Tennessee Titans. We talked about Will Levis's schedule. Well, bad defenses are bad defenses, and these teams are not good at defending the run either. Gets Jacksonville 2nd most points allowed to backs this week. Week 15, Cincinnati right there in the middle of the pack. And then Indianapolis and Jacksonville week 16 and 17, the 7th and 2nd most points allowed to backs. So should Pollard, this big workload he's carrying, end up catching to him. Tyjae Spears, who we saw electric last year in his limited touches. He's just been completely stymied by the fact Tony Pollard's well ahead of him. He's had some nagging injuries to deal with as well, but Spears is a phenomenal receiver. They've already talked about how they view him as a true 3-down back if they ever needed to use him in that capacity. So Spears is somebody I would not have sitting out there in waiver wires. I could totally see him if he was starting against Indianapolis or Jacksonville, would probably be a top 15 running back in my rankings. So those are the big handcuffs. I guess I should mention Cam Akers as well, given he has clearly taken over for Ty Chandler there, and we continue to see him work in right around 35% of the snaps. This last week, we had Akers have 4 carries for 22 yards, a beautiful-looking 18-run scamper with a nice spin, a stiff arm, looking phenomenal there. Aaron Jones also fumbled this game, and that's where we saw Akers start to get his role picked up a little bit. And so with a history, too, of nagging soft tissue injuries for Aaron Jones, I did want to put Cam Akers on here, not because he's as talented as any of those guys we were just talking about, a lot of electric rookies on that list. But ultimately, it feels like he has a real shot to come into a starter or two here down the stretch. And we've seen 12-point days, 13-point days with the Texans as a starter as well. You look at the playoff schedule, Chicago, 10th most points, Seattle, 13th most points, and then Green Bay, 18th. So no real threatening matchups, some in the middle of the road there. Very soft schedule. The one bonus guy I want to toss out there, and it might not even be just pure handcuff, is Kendre Miller in your deeper leagues, 3% rostered right now. But Darren Rizzi, the Rizzler, did say that Kendre Miller will be returning from injured reserve this week. He said Kendre is a, quote, talented player. There's no one who can sit here and deny that. He can produce for this team. I don't have a doghouse. My doghouse is empty at the moment. I don't have a dog, is what he said. And he also said, quote, all gas, no brakes in terms of using Kendre Miller when he returns. Sounds like he didn't really need to go into the IR, but this is the whole Dennis Allen hates this guy for whatever reason. But ultimately, he is not in Rizzler's doghouse, at least. And he has a beautiful schedule. The Giants this week, a great spot to debut, the most yards per carry allowed. And then Washington, Green Bay, Raiders, all top half matchups for Kendre Miller. And let's see his hamstring hold up for a game. That's part of why I'm not going all that crazy. But at TCU, it was hard not to love this guy. So much explosiveness. Ultimately, too, with Taysom Hill now done for the year, a volume sponge, 17 touches 2 weeks ago, 10 touches last week, and about 3/4 of action. That removed, there's going to be plenty of open volume here in this offense. And I do think Kendre Miller is a prime candidate to soak a lot of that up. What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.